So good afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. And Carla, thank you for just an amazing lecture. And I totally agree with you. The stories of women and how important they are in difference, and looking at cultural difference and racial difference and sexual difference, hugely, hugely important. So I'm going to bring you back in time a little bit from Carla's lecture. But before I begin, I would like to sincerely thank Maite Mendez-Vargas and Elena Rodriguez and the museum for inviting me here today. I'm absolutely delighted to be here. It's actually my first lecture in Spain, and I'm thrilled to be here in your beautiful country. I also wish to extend my sincerest congratulations to Rosia de la Vega and to Elena on this amazing exhibition. I thoroughly enjoyed walking through it last night. Another important point about exhibitions like this, and I can speak as a researcher here, is access to paintings. All too often, and to works of art, all too often works of art are held in storage or they're in private collections, works by women artists. And I mean, I saw paintings yesterday for the first time that I've been writing about for 10 years. So it was an honor. Thank you. So in my lecture, I will present, it's based on excerpts from my recent book by Routledge, published by Routledge, French Women Orientalists, Cross-Cultural Contexts and Depictions of Difference. So I'm aware this is a public lecture, so I want to just bring back and make sure we're all on the same page in relation to Orientalism. So the term Orientalism, it's of European origin, and Orientalist refers to European persons whose artistic practices were influenced by the historically Moorish regions of Spain and countries within what we now know today as the Near and Greater Middle East, and it can also include the Far East. Orientalism flourished in European art, particularly in France, Britain and Italy during the late 18th and 19th and the early 20th centuries, even though histories of Orientalism will tell you different about the 20th century. In my own work, I am now writing a book that is arguing for Orientalism is still going strong throughout the 20th century and into the 21st century, but that's another project. Although it is a major movement in art, there was no official school of Orientalism. Rather, artists were defined as Orientalists or were linked to the movement for a period of time through their subject matter, and due to various colonial and political events, artists working in France, on whom my lecture today focuses, emphasized the Maghrebi region of North Africa, particularly Algeria, Tunisia and Morocco. Okay. There we go. So my recent book, a project which was 10 years in the making, has rethought French Orientalism by compiling primary source information about women artists who practiced in France and in the Maghreb region of North Africa between 1860 and 1956. Now, through archival research, I've examined 72 largely ignored French female artists whose works show influence of Orientalist subject matter, many whom were hugely successful artists in their day, yet until now, the history of art has given very little or no attention to them. Now, please don't worry, I'm not going to discuss all 72 today. So my work has clearly established that French women were active professional participants in Orientalist art of the late 19th and the early 20th centuries. And in my lecture today, I will discuss just two of these French artists who practiced in very, very different time periods and in completely different styles. So the first is the naturalist painter Marie Luca-Rubiquet, whose Orientalist period was between 1880 and 1910. And the second is the modernist Ketty Carré, whose Orientalist period was between 1910 and 1938. Now, I bring these two very, very different artists together with three objectives in mind. The first objective that I have today is I wish to explore how 19th century women Orientalists, for example, like Luca-Rubiquet, transferred the European subject matter of the modern woman to North Africa, a subject matter which was later adopted by Carré in just a few of her modernist paintings. And you will see in the exhibition, the modern woman features heavily throughout the exhibition. My second objective today is I wish to build a bridge between mainstream or conventional 19th century Orientalism and the early 20th century avant-garde. Now, the reason I wish to build this bridge, as I mentioned, is because conventional histories of art tend to claim that Orientalism petered off or ended after the 1890s. However, this is not the case. Rather, as I mentioned earlier, Orientalism flourished into the 20th century and into modernist practices. So my third objective from my lecture today is I wish to look at the different ways that Le Corbusier and Carré were inspired by North African art and craft practices, such as Berber weaving and Islamic decoration. So my overarching aim of my lecture today is that I wish to bring these two very different artists together to show that through their practices, French women artists played a very important part in the advancement of Orientalist aesthetics during the late 19th and the early 20th century. So just a little bit of background knowledge, first of all, to make sure again that we're all on the same page about Orientalism. Conventionally, when one thinks of 19th century Orientalism, what might come to mind is the exotic or erotic harem scenes, such as those seen in the works of Jean-Léon Gérôme or even Théodore Chassario. Well, my work moves completely away from such depictions. Art historians Mary Roberts and Raina Lewis discuss how in 1860, the French painter Henriette Brown moved away from the sexualized representation of Muslim women in Orientalism, and instead she presented different and more benign representations of Ottoman women in an upper-class home in Constantinople in Turkey. Now, I build on such interpretive models which engage with the female gaze by greatly expanding the canon of French women Orientalists and by moving the discussion geographically to North Africa as well as into the site of modern painting. So when I was invited to deliver this lecture, I began to reflect on the exhibition we're here to celebrate. Now, I initially thought that I would engage with the exhibition section or the theme dedicated to Orientalism and genre painting only. However, as my lecture developed, I quickly became aware that I will also be led not just by Orientalism and French women, but I'll also be led by sisterhood, workers and carers, new portrayals of motherhood and emancipated women, not just in France, but also in Algeria and Tunisia. Now, it must be stated that French women Orientalist perspective of North Africa were informed by their own artistic training and social positions in France and Europe, and subsequently they articulated alternative and complicated and at times very problematic representations of the cultures they encountered during their travels. And to be clear from the very beginning of my lecture, it is not my contention to claim that women Orientalists like Le Corbusier and Carré created accurate depictions of specific late 19th and early 20th century Algerian and Tunisian peoples, or that the artists are void of any political or colonial constructs. In fact, colonial and protectorate conditions enabled Le Corbusier and Carré to paint in North Africa. Rather, I contend that even through periods of colonial devastation, moments or methods of communication and cross-cultural learning can still occur. Concerning the Orientalist paintings I will discuss here today, I view them as historically rich and complicated communicative spaces which were undeniably framed by European art practices painted by and through the perspectives of French women Orientalists. So I begin now with Marie Le Corbusier. Her full name, Marie Elizabeth Aimée Le Corbusier, born 1858, died 1959. And she was born in Avanches, Normandy, and she died in 1959 in Saint Raphael, France. Now, as women were not permitted entry into the École des Beaux-Arts until 1897, in circa 1875, the artist turned to the art tuition of Félix-Joseph Barrier in Paris. Throughout her long and successful artistic career, which spanned the period between 1880 and 1934, Le Corbusier regularly exhibited with many artistic societies, including the Salon of the Society of French Artists, or the official salon, the Salon of the Society of Orientalist Painters, which I will refer to later as the Orientalist Salon. She also exhibited with the Colonial Society of French Artists, and she participated in the 1906 and 1922 Marseille Colonial Exhibitions, among many other society exhibitions. She also exhibited annually with the Union of Women Painters and Sculptors in Paris from 1892 to 1890, and once again in 1908. Now, for over 50 years, she exhibited with the official salon, where she was held in high regard and awarded numerous medals for her artistic endeavours by its juries. In 1922, she received the Supreme Award of Knight of the Legion of Honour from the French government for outstanding artistic achievements and endeavours. And defining her position as an Orientalist artist in France, Luca Rubiquet exhibited at the Orientalist Salon in Paris from 1895 to 1914. And it was here that her paintings were exhibited with those of her Orientalist predecessors, for example, Eugène Delacroix or Théodore Chézariot, as well as with her Orientalist contemporaries, including Pierre Auguste Renoir, Cécile Bogarde, Etienne Dinet, and Lucie Rennes Villa-Cartier, and many, many others. During the artist's lifetime, Algeria was under French rule, and the French era in Tunisia commenced in 1881 with a protectorate, which subsequently ended in 1956. In 1891, Marie Rubiquet married Captain Maurice Luca, who was born and lived in Algeria, and after their marriage, Luca Rubiquet moved to Algeria, and subsequently in 1892, one witnesses the beginning of the artist's Orientalist subject matter at the Salons of Paris. The artist's Orientalist works are by far the most critically acclaimed of her oeuvre, and I will move forward now by presenting what I like to call her Weaver series. So Arab interior in Ourlal Brisk, this is in Algeria, exhibited at the official salon of 1892, is the first known work which shows Luca Rubiquet's interest in Berber female craftwork in North Africa, specifically Algeria in this case. Now, concerning the title of the painting, Arab Interior, the title accompanied the exhibition of the work at the 1892 Salon, so this precise title was given to the work by the artist. The women portrayed are not Arabs, they are Berbers. Berbers are tribal peoples whose recorded place of origin is North Africa. There are many diverse tribes and Berber communities, and they speak various languages. So this major error in racial and cultural identification is just one example of the major issues which can arise in cross-cultural representations. And this is why I never use the term ethnographic painting in relation to Orientalism. The term is far too problematic. So the painting in question depicts 5 Berber women from the oasis of Ourlal, Algeria, and these women are actively at work within a private domestic space. Now, the Berber woman who sits to the center right of the painting, so do you need me to point, or it's okay? You'd like me to point? And the pointer doesn't work. No, sorry. The pointer is failing me. Apologies. So the Berber woman who sits to the center right of the painting and is dressed in vivid reddish-orange garb is preparing couscous in a basin. The sitter on the far right is preparing wool for weaving, and the woman who stands in the center of the painting is drawing water, perhaps for the preparation of couscous or for the cleaning of wool. Now, the preparation of wool involves 3 phases: cleaning or scouring, carding, combing and separating of wool fibres, and the spinning processes. The woman depicted in this painting appears to be spinning wool. Luca Rubiquet carefully considered the atmosphere which surrounds the figures. From the thick billow of smoke, it is evident that the fire is burning to the right of the painting. The dense charcoal-toned smoke travels to the roof and subsequently falls over the left of the painting to cause a smoky grey filter. The right side of the canvas is lit by warm golden tones by the fire, whereas the left is clouded by cooler grey tones. This contrasting effect presents the viewer with the sense that the setting is within an enclosed structure where little sunlight can enter, perhaps a traditional Berber troglodyte house. High contrasts of light and shades such as this are identifying traits of Luca Rubiquet's painting styles. In March 1895, an engraved reproduction of the weaver's Arab interior in Constantine appeared in the front page of Le Monde Illustré. Artist and critic Luc-Olivier Merson refers to Luca Rubiquet's exhibited works in both the official Salon of 1894 and the Orientalist Salon of 1895, and I quote, "The weaver's Arab interior Constantine, which is remarkable and highly remarked upon, got a medal for its creator, a Salon medal for its creator, who stands out amongst our best modern Oriental painters. Madame Luca Rubiquet, of whom we, Le Monde Illustré, have already reproduced several pieces of work, experiences at this time the highest success at the exhibition de Ranuel with her famous work of the Arabic women of Urlal. Our readers will be pleased with us for having once more devoted our time, thanks to our artistic reproduction, to the masterly and virile talent of this young and so personal artist." Now, isn't it interesting that Merson, in order to refer to Luca Rubiquet as masterly, he felt he needed to use the term virile, male-like. So I thought that was quite interesting in relation to writings about Luca Rubiquet. Now, in this review, Merson not only expressed the opinion that Luca Rubiquet stood out amongst the best of France's modern Orientalist painters, but also that she experienced immense success with her works at the Orientalist Salon that year. Moreover, Merson refers to Luca Rubiquet as a personal artist, suggesting that he recognized her method of intimate cultural observation and the ways in which she details certain cultural characteristics in her paintings. Demonstrating the appreciation the international art world held for Luca Rubiquet, in 1895, critic René Moreau stated in the Parisian Illustrated Review, New York, that, and I quote again, "Madame Luca Rubiquet merits a very distinguished place among our own Orientalists. Her open-air studies are vibrating with light and sun, with a wise tendency towards reasonable impressionism. Madame Luca Rubiquet has confined herself almost exclusively to reproductions of Algerian life. She has not shown us what she would do in the genre called Parisienne, but few Parisian artists reach her freedom, her vigor, her cleanliness in very sunny scenes so full of attraction, of poetry, which belong to an artist of the highest order," close quote. So another of Luca Rubiquet's weaver, from her Weaver series, is Weavers in Gabès, Tunisia, which the artist exhibited in the 1906 official Salon. The painting depicts 4 Berber women weaving in a domestic space, and on the right, 2 women are weaving on a vertical loom. Another woman sits in the background behind the loom as she prepares wool for weaving, and the 4th woman, who is the more dominant figure, stands in the center of the painting holding a child. Now, in this instance, due to the presence of a child, the artist has depicted not only a space of economic production, but also that of family and motherhood. Reflecting on the artist's meticulous attention to detail, in the foreground left is a toppled basket of wool, which refers to the natural elements of weaving. The weaver's removed shoes are sitting neatly in the foreground, and as with almost all of the artist's interior scenes, a bindir or a drum hangs on the right wall, and you can just see it in the background right. And this makes reference to the importance of music to Berber cultural heritage. Now, as a part of my research into the series, I interviewed a number of traditional Berber weavers in southern Tunisia, and for this I particularly wish to thank Miriam Gadminia for sharing with me some of her vast 70-year knowledge about Berber weaving. What I learned from Miriam, for example, take note of the weaver who is seated in the foreground right. With simultaneous action, she is tightening the weave or the knots on the loom. And with her left hand, the weaver is pulling a section of the frame towards her, putting tension on the vertical strands of wool. And in her right hand, she holds a fork-like device, and this device is called the kalal, and it's also in English would be referred to as the beating comb, which is used to beat or to tighten the knots on the loom. And it is cultural details like this which make the artist's paintings so intriguing to me, and that is In the 19th century, Berber weaving was an all-female art practice, and Luca Rubiquet made a visual record of certain techniques used in this female practice, a traditional art that is now almost lost in Algeria and Tunisia because of industrialization and technological advancements. But one of the most impressive paintings in Luca Rubiquet's Weaver series is Interior Benyanuf South Oran, Algeria, circa 1909. Now, this beautifully executed scene depicts 4 Berber women weaving in an interior space. One of the weavers has a child strapped to her back, which again suggests a space which combines active female Berber labour with motherhood. The woman to the left of the painting, or the women to the left of the painting, are wearing traditional Berber attire and jewellery combined with the white Arabic hajj. Luca Rubiquet has again highlighted female Berber craft production in the Maghreb. However, this time the painting is divided equally into 2 key phases of weaving: the spinning of wool and the weaving of wool on the wooden vertical loom. The 2 young Algerian girls to the right of the painting are preparing the wool and spinning it onto spools, and the wool is then fed to the weavers for weaving on the vertical loom. The artist has used a widely practiced artistic method in order to lead the viewer through her painting. Firstly, the viewer's eye is led to the young female woolen spinners, which are situated to the right of the canvas, and one is dressed in vivid red clothing, which very cleverly draws the eye, and the other, through outstretched arm and frontal position, presents to us their task, and this is they're preparing or spinning wool for weaving. And next, the viewer's eye travels to acknowledge the weavers behind the vertical loom, as well as the loom itself. And finally, the viewer becomes aware of the less dominant details in the painting, such as the young baby wrapped to the back of the weaver, or the drum which hangs on the wall. Now again, the artist has focused on the practice of tightening and weaving knots on the loom, made evident by the khalal in the weaver's right hand. Showing her painterly skill, the artist has not only presented her perspective on Algerian female culture in a domestic labour space, but she has also attempted to lead the viewer through the traditional processes of Berber weaving that are associated with Algeria and wider North Africa. So again, I mentioned to you, this is not an accurate depiction of people. Rather, it is a carefully choreographed scene which shows Luca Rubiquet's understanding of an all-female cultural practice in Algeria. Traits of the artist's naturalist brushwork are evident in Interior Benyanuf. Strokes move from the very detailed, for example, the sitter's features, hands, the thick layering of material that constitutes their clothing or jewellery, to impasto, and for example, the walls and floor. Now, it's wonderful to see the artist's meticulous attention to detail when painting the vertical loom. Her use of light illuminates the vertical strands of wool, as well as the ropes used to tie this handmade apparatus together. And this striking naturalist handling of paint, light, shadow, and subject matter gives the viewer a sense of the atmospheric elements surrounding the weavers. And this is why I would refer to, I've often heard Luca Rubiquet, for example, some auction houses, because this is where she has been discussed before, was art auction houses, referring to her as an impressionist. I would gear away from that because Luca Rubiquet engaged so much with atmospheric element and light. I feel she is a naturalist because she's engaging with Émile Zola's ideas of naturalism and expression of culture and identity through atmosphere. So the painting encapsulates Moreau's words when he stated in 1895 that few Parisian artists reached her, Luca Rubiquet's, freedom, her vigour, her cleanliness in very sunny scenes so full of attraction, of poetry, which belonged to an artist of the highest order. Moreover, it also captures the words of Merson when he stated in 1895 that Luca Rubiquet had a masterly talent. So at this juncture, it is relevant to question why Luca Rubiquet chose to focus on weaver interiors in Algeria and Tunisia between 1891 and 1909. And in doing so, 3 key factors come into play. Well, the first factor is that the movement of the applied and decorative arts was at its height in France from 1890 to 1910. The second factor one which positions Luca Rubiquet, her weaver paintings, in line with conventional Orientalism, was that her choice and approach to subject matter was also influenced by the popular trends in French Orientalism of the time. And the third factor in Luca Rubiquet's approach to subject matter was the shifting representation of women in France in art post-1880. So when considering There we go. So when considering representations of the 19th century modern woman, there are many artists to look to, and a few examples from the exhibition Maestras includes Mary Cassatt, Cecilia Beau, Marie Petier, and of course Berthe Morisot. So looking at Morisot is just one example. She created numerous paintings that focused on women and their relationship with the world around them, void of the male gaze. Now, what makes Morisot's female representations different from that of her male contemporaries is that the artist dedicated her artistic study to representations of women. And that is women's social positions, work, including motherhood, and their self-agency as seen by women. And I'm in agreement with Griselda Pollock when she states that such paintings are monuments created in their historical moment and that they stand at the beginning of a process of women's cultural modernization, which include an exploration of women's cultural and political consciousness. Now, what I will add to this discussion is that through their portrayals of modern French women, artists like Morisot, Cassatt, and many others set the bar for painters who were active in Paris during or just after the turn of the century, including women Orientalists. Now, pushing this discussion further, Luca Rubiquet was a loyal member of the Union of Women Painters and Sculptors. I'll refer to it as the Union from here on. So the Union was a congregation of female artistic voices that strove to break through limited artistic, social, and professional boundaries fixed on women. In January 1882, gathering together in unity, 41 women artists exhibited together for the first salon of the Union, including the early career 24-year-old Marie Rubiquet. She wasn't married at that time. On analysing Luca Rubiquet's oeuvre and its female-dominated subject matter in its entirety, it is clear that the artist was concerned with the modern world of women during the fin de siècle. Thus, I claim that Orientalists like Luca Rubiquet transferred the modern woman's subject matter from France to North Africa and into the site of Orientalist painting. In her North African Weaver series, Luca Rubiquet used the process of all women weaving to comment on North African women's modern working lives. Through her painterly approach and focus on North African female subject matter, Luca Rubiquet moved her representations of Algerian and Tunisian women away from the traditional Orientalist stereotypes of women as passive or erotic objects, and instead she presented views of her sitters as active makers, contributing to their societies. This reveals that Luca Rubiquet most likely considered weaving to be an important, traditional, and perhaps potentially progressive component in some North African women's lives. Now, at this juncture, I just want to add in here, I don't have time to go into this subject very in detail, but I just want to think of this because I think it's thought-provoking to consider the similarity between Luca Rubiquet's observation of fin de siècle North African women weavers and those made by the first Tunisian government about women, art, and female industry in the country post-1956. During the 10-year period after independence from France, the Tunisian Republic recognized and embraced weaving as an important signifier of female artistic identity, economy, and modernity. Now, according to art historian Jessica Girl-Scholz, governmental policies encouraged Tunisian women to enter the labour force via the expansion of weaving industries and further development of female art and craft practices. Between 1892 and 1909, through her detailed Weaver series, Luca Rubiquet recognised and repeatedly painted this active female art practice across Tunisia and Algeria. Her paintings tell a story in their visual articulation. The artist's close attention to women's cultural heritage, as well as their proactive weaving practices, suggests that she saw weaving as a catalyst for female modernity in North Africa. Now, also by complete coincidence, I'm not saying there's a connection between Luca Rubiquet and women painters 1960, but a complete coincidence. Weaving was also embraced by Tunisian women artists much later in the 1970s as a springboard for female modernity. Now, an example of this woven contemporary works, they can be seen in the works of Safia Ferhat, a Tunisian artist, and you can find Ferhat's artist biography and examples of her work on the Aware Archive of Women Artists. So I now depart from Luca Rubiquet's naturalism, and I make a leap in time as well as a leap in style of painting to French modernist Orientalism, specifically the works of Ketty Carré. Now, as I mentioned earlier, Luca Rubiquet and Carré, they have little to nothing in common, bar the fact that they were French and they engaged with Orientalism. But discussing both in my lecture, I simply wish to show how French women artists played a very important part in the advancements of Orientalist aesthetics, not just in the 19th century, but well into the 20th century also. So a little background of information about Orientalism in the early 20th century and Orientalist practices. For the purpose of developing European art practices in the Maghreb, at the end of the 19th century, French artistic cultural centres were established in North Africa. For example, the Institute of Carthage in Tunisia and the École Nationale des Beaux-Arts in Algeria. Several societies were also established, including the Society of French Colonial Artists and the Society of Algerian and Orientalist Artists. Now, these institutions and societies not only contributed to the development of French art practices and exhibitions in the Maghreb, but they also encouraged more French artists to travel to the colony and protectorates. Thus, this early 20th century period in Orientalist art developed into what was increasingly referred to as l'art colonial. And I argue that 20th century women Orientalists were very active in the development of this modern Orientalist era. Art historian Roger Benjamin argues for the stylistic bridge between mainstream, all-male 19th century Orientalists and the all-male early 20th century abstractionists. Benjamin highlights the fact that art histories of Orientalism, as well as many literary works on the avant-garde, tend to consider modernist-style paintings of North African subject matter to be outside of the Orientalist tradition. And in agreement with Benjamin, I also argue that the Orientalist avant-garde is very much a part of the Orientalist tradition. And building on this, I wish to add women Orientalists to the discussion and also claim that, like the conventionalists, the avant-gardists strove to capture and express their Maghrebi experiences. However, the avant-gardists concern themselves with expression through modernist form, and one such artist is the artist Ketty Carré. So Carré was a respected member of the Society of French Artists, and she exhibited her painting widely at the salons of Paris from 1911 to 1938. The artist was married to the Orientalist painter and illustrator Léon Carré, and although an artist of high merit in her own right, Ketty Carré is usually only briefly mentioned in artist dictionaries or in art historical texts or collections, and she is always only briefly discussed in the shadow of her husband's art career. Now, one of the reasons for the latter is because in 1908, Léon Carré won the Orientalist Salon's prestigious travel bursary to Algeria, which permitted him to live and practice his art in the Villa Abdel Tif in the city of Algiers, which was an artist residency for French artists in Algiers. So Ketty Carré accompanied her husband to Algeria when he took up this residency, and Ketty and Léon Carré painted together at the villa from 1909 to 1910. Now, this time in Algiers marked the beginning of Ketty Carré's relationship with Orientalist subject matter, and it places her within what would later be known as the School of Algiers. The records of the Orientalist Salon show that in 1930, the artist took up permanent residency in Algeria, and she stopped exhibiting with the Orientalist Salon in 1938. Carré's modernist form was also influenced by her study of Islamic painting and textiles, as well as Berber carpets. Her use of decorative motifs, blocks of vibrant colour, limited use of perspective and shadow, compositional freedom, her use of low diagonal axis emulate the traditional Czech techniques found in Islamic painting, particularly in miniatures. In addition, Carré also used traditional motifs or symbols found in woven Berber carpets. An article published in the 1913 catalogue of the Society of Algerian Artists and Orientalists stated that Carré purchased traditional textiles in southern Algeria, and it is in part from the motifs and designs in such decorative arts that the artist drew her inspiration. And this focus on Maghrebi textiles builds upon the similar interests of Luca Rubiquet, but whereas Luca Rubiquet focused on the woven production of North African carpets, Carré focused on design and motif. However, unlike Luca Rubiquet, Carré did not focus on all-female subject matter. Rather, she was inspired by the conventional, exotic themes found in 19th century Orientalism, such as odalisques, café scenes, snake charmers, and harem interiors. However, Carré was more concerned with the study of decorative contours for the development of her own modernist form. And for example, here is Arab Interior from 1931 by Carré. And it is a beautifully painted scene of 3 Arab women enjoying tea or coffee in a female space of an upper-class home. Now note the correct ladylike seated position of the woman situated to the right of the painting. Her hands are folded on her lap with grace and etiquette. In contrast, a woman sits comfortably on the floor and with her back to the viewer. She reclines back slightly, presenting a contrast with the first figure. The painting portrays female companionship, which called to mind the ideas of the late 19th century modern woman in France, and it is void of any sexual charge stereotypically associated with erotic Orientalist harem scenes. Now, although Carré employs an avant-garde style of painting, her benign approach to the subject matter of Muslim women within a private female space is reminiscent of the work of the 19th century Orientalist Henrietta Brown. Brown received acclaim at the 1861 Salon of Paris, where she exhibited a Visit Harem Interior Constantinople. The artist desexualized Orientalist representations of the harem space, and instead she emphasized the harem as a domestic and socially dignified place for women and children. In 1860, Brown was a guest in this upper-class Ottoman home, and she approached her scene from 2 views. That of a woman, where a woman viewing women in a private space is a factor, and that of a French person, where power structures and difference comes into the picture. Now, art historian Mary Roberts claims that although Brown desexualized the harem space, she also found an alternative way to portray herself to enter the female Orientalist fantasy. And this is also true of Carré's modernist Arab interior. Now, an initial reading of this painting will present Carré's work as a rich source of Orientalist fantasy, in which a woman artist working in Algeria created a space where she could engage with the imagination. Like Brown's A Visit, Carré's architectural space uses objects sparingly. A carpet on the floor, a table, as well as a single divan, and they all rest on this black and white checkered floor tiles. Moreover, although a visit is not implied in the title, in Carré's Arab Interior, the viewer gets the feeling that the artist's presence is recognized by the seated woman. She gazes out from the canvas and attempts to connect with the viewer's eyeline. Thus, she acknowledges the viewer's presence. Such characteristics make us think that we are a guest in this home. And I recall to you here Lyndon Naucklin's argument that Europeans are visually absent but psychologically present in Orientalist painting because they constitute the all-seeing, all-powerful gaze. Now, this is one important way of reading Carré's Arab Interior, and that is through a post-colonial lens of otherness. However, I wish to push this much further by giving attention to the artist's use of modernist form and her focus on the female body. So I would claim that another historical source of artistic influence for Carré's work was most likely Delacroix's famed Women of Algiers in their apartment, 1834. Now remember, Carré was also inspired by the city of Algiers when she took up residency in 1930. Delacroix's work also depicts a fantasized view of a harem in a Muslim home. Portrayed in the painting are 3 seated female figures and 1 standing figure. The standing figure is of darker skin tone, and generally in Orientalism, this darker figure is a servant who is usually active in the painting in contrast to the passive seated or reclining white figures. Light streams into Delacroix's painting from the left. The illuminating light, the model's ornate costumes, the many ornamental objects, as well as the heightened decorative motif which adorns the painting, pulls the viewer's eye around the picture, not permitting the eye to rest in one place for long periods of time. There is no one single focal point in this painting, and importantly, the decorative objects and ornamentation act to further enclose the women within space. Now, returning to Carré's scene, one can see that the artist has almost mirrored the configuration of figures in Delacroix's Women of Algiers. However, unlike Delacroix's confined space, Carré's use of open space, she uses open space, and this openness is due to the blocks of colour and space in the upper half of the picture. However, Carré has employed modernist decoration in her avant-garde greeting or visit. Arabesque decoration flows across the background wall and the figure's clothing, and it creates a sense of movement in the open space, which in turn serves to activate the female figures. But it is the lack of balance in this space, combined with this decorative form, which creates a tension in the work. At first glance, the painting feels somewhat chaotic. In keeping with Delacroix's painting, the arabesque pattern pulls the viewer's eye around Carré's scene. Subsequently, the eye is unable to rest in one place. The wall, the checkered floors, and the figures actively converge and diverge, creating further motion in the work. However, Carré's 3 seated figures are anchored by the horizontal border on the wall behind them. The weighty disposition of this cluster of women, combined with the heavy checkered floor, creates the feeling that the picture is unstable and about to fall downward to the left. Balance is further disrupted by the server entering the room on the left. In addition, our sense of balance is again disrupted as the checkered floor pulls our eye downward to the lower left corner of the canvas, where the geometric line breaks the frame and flows into the viewer's space. Combined, this heightened use of perspective gives a sense that the figures will eventually slide into our space. Now, this sensation of sliding is further enhanced by the braced disposition of the reclining woman in the foreground. Unlike Delacroix's reclining woman, Carré's reclining figure has her back turned to us. She's not concerned with our presence. Furthermore, the tilted composition is further enhanced by the textile sliding off the table. Carré's play with modernist decorative form, perspective, and balance, or lack thereof in this case, has created a picture which is difficult to look at, and to spend a long time looking at the work is very, very difficult. And the viewer is in a constant state of confusion and unbalance. Furthermore, behind the central figure is a frame of decoration. And due to the similar decorative pattern on her headpiece and dress, this woman begins to blend into her orientalist frame. Yet simultaneously, she is not centered in her orientalist frame, which combined with her strong gaze brings her back into focus. Responding to, and I would even go as far as arguing, pushing back against Delacroix's Women of Algiers. Through its formal qualities, Arab Interior is making a statement about the uneasiness associated to depictions of female spaces in Orientalist art. The painting interacts with the viewer's senses, and the portrayal of the female body both connects with, yet it departs from, the Orientalist tradition. Carré has employed this Orientalist process by decorating the female figures in space and presenting them for the purpose of being looked at. Now, I recall to you again, Linda Nochlin tells us the European is always present in Orientalist art, while Ketty Carré's work demands the European's viewer presence in order to make meaning. But rather than taking mere Orientalist pleasure from the female figures, Carré's composition challenges the viewer to focus on the figures in space. Through the process of looking at Carré's composition, The Orientalist gaze reverts back onto the viewer and which induces a state of self-awareness in the viewer. This use of modernist form creates a tension between the female figures, the decoration, the female space depicted, and the viewer. Simultaneously, the viewer, us, we become the object, the subject, and the viewed. This is still Carré's female fantasy. This is her way of paying homage to the practices of traditional Orientalism. In this case, I'm claiming Brown and Delacroix. Yet this is also Carré's way of questioning depictions of the harem in Orientalist painting. The artist's modern style, her use of drawing and representation of the female figure, and her homage to the historiography of Orientalist practices and Islamic decorative arts, together broadens the discourse surrounding the Orientalist avant-garde. So to conclude, I recall to you again the late 19th century representations of the modern woman, for example, those by Berthe Morisot, where the artist and her many female counterparts disrupted the conventional portrayal of women in late 19th century French art. Thus, when we recall Luca Rubiquet's naturalist weaver paintings in between 1890 and 1910, and Carré's visually challenging modernist harem scene from 1931, it becomes evident that in very different ways and in different time periods, these paintings also disrupt the passive portrayal of Muslim women in Western-made Orientalist art. Now, as mentioned, no comparisons can be made between French female experiences and that of Algerian, Tunisian, and Moroccan women, and to do so would be greatly flawed because the experiences of women across borders are extremely diverse and they are dependent on one's own culture, history, and geography. But what I do argue in my work is that over the longue durée, women Orientalists provided interesting and active representations of Muslim women and female culture in French Orientalist painting, and on doing so, they advanced Orientalist aesthetics. Thank you very much.